Hello, twisted humans. Do you find yourself wanting to know more about the latest murder, conspiracy, cult, or haunting?
Then this is the podcast for you. I'm Alicia.
And I'm Sierra, and this is Twisted and Uncorked. Hello and welcome to episode 165, part 2.
As she quickly reads the email subject line.
Yes. Of your favorite podcast. This is us. We are here. When we left off on part 1 last week, it was the end of 1972, and Dean Corll had murdered at least 10 boys while using the help of David Brooks and Wayne Henley to lure them to his home. They were groomed and manipulated by Dean into helping him at just 12 and 15 years old, respectively. Unfortunately, this nightmare continues. But before we get into all of that, Alicia, do you have a fun fact for me?
My fun fact is short and sweet and a little silly because of today's heavier subject matter. And that is there's a frog that is critically endangered. And the reason that it is critically endangered is because people actually like to eat this frog, which I guess you do you. And it is in Lake Titicaca. And it is called the Titicaca scrotum frog.
Okay, so we're putting boobs, poop, and balls all in the same frog and then putting them in our mouth?
Yeah.
A little confusing,
It's
but okay.
It's not like great. I'm gonna send you a reel about it.
Please do, because I don't even believe that this is a real thing.
You can see our Lake Titicaca scrotum frog.
The boob poop ball frog.
Also known as the boob poop ball frog. It literally looks like a little scrotum. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh my god. That's weird.
Yeah, so they're endangered. Stop eating them if you live in Lake Titicaca area. Because that is the only place that this frog lives, and it is critically endangered. So,
also, if you live in Lake Titicaca, please email us because I don't believe this place is real. Prove it.
You've never heard of Lake Titicaca?
No.
Oh my god, I used to laugh about that as a kid.
I would too. I'm laughing now. So,
what is your fun fact?
My fun fact is a bit of a correction or clarification on something we talked about on Bitch and Wine. So I don't know if this comes out before or after, but it's about sunscreen. Okay. So all about sunscreen and Bitch and Wine and about how sunblock is better than sunscreen. Okay. But here's the thing. The fun fact is that technically you cannot find a sunblock because they're legally not allowed to be called sunblock. That's why everything says sunscreen. Oh. You're not allowed to call them sunblock because they don't technically, literally block the sun. So the difference is sunscreen, quote unquote, is chemical sunscreens, and sunblock, quote unquote, is physical sunscreens. Physical meaning mineral and stuff like that. So anyway, mineral sunscreens are best. That's all. Sunblock is not allowed to be used. The term, anyway.
Yes. But
sunscreen.
The benefits of it come from mineral sunscreen.
Right. Sunscreen / chemical sunscreens absorb the sun. The sun hits your body and it absorbs the sun and then turns it into heat and pushes it back out. That's what sunscreens, chemical sunscreens do. Sunblocks, like I was saying in the thing, reflect it. So that's why it's better. It doesn't absorb it at all. It just reflects it. What are we drinking tonight?
Absolutely. You're going to laugh. So I was in a panic rush to make this when I got home from yoga. And I've already drank half of it, as you can see. But
It's
instead of
blue.
finding a good cup to put this in, I panicked and grabbed one of my like protein powder shaker cups. So it is in
Oh,
my G Fuel cup right now. If anyone is
okay.
confused by this glassware, I feel like a child drinking out of a plastic cup.
I feel like it looks like you're drinking out of a urine sample cup, so I'm glad to know that it's for protein drinks instead.
Ah.
I was like, what is that blue pea?
Please stop drinking it immediately. It can't be good for you. Well, it's probably not because, alcohol in moderation, but it is a spin on one of my favorite cocktails, a blue Hawaiian, hence the blue.
Mm.
I wanted a blue Hawaiian, but I needed to make a sangria. So I made a blue Hawaiian sangria with our white wine from last week, blue curacao, pineapple juice. I didn't have cream of coconut. I had coconut water though, so I added a little bit of that. And you can garnish it with whatever you'd like, pineapple, cherry, a slice of coconut if you're feeling fancy. And if you're feeling extra spicy and you want to add in some extra booze, you can do a coconut rum. I recommend Malibu, of course. Or if it's too much coconut for you, you can just do whatever dark rum, spiced rum, whatever you'd like. So that is what we are drinking today. It is fucking delightful. I skipped out on the rum because the blue curacao and the wine is enough for me, but oh man, she tasty. Who knew? Who knew?
Mm-hmm.
I think I like it more because blue Hawaiians are traditionally quite sweet, but the wine adds like an element where it kind of cuts the sweetness a little bit and makes it a little boozier. So I'm enjoying it.
There we go. Well, we are going to get into this terrible tale after a quick break to hear a promo from, I think, My Fridge is Haunted.
And we will be right back.
On January 20th, 1973, Dean Corll moved into an address on Wirt Road in the Spring Branch district of Houston, and within 2 weeks of moving, he was back to brutally torturing, raping, and murdering teenage boys in the Houston area. 17-year-old Joseph Lyles had lived on Antoine. Is that how you say that? Antoine. On Antoine Drive in Houston, the same street upon which David Brooks's family lived. The two teens were familiar with one another at the very least. On February 1st, Joseph was lured back to Dean's home, tortured, strangled, and buried at Jefferson County Beach. Joseph had been an artist, he was a good kid, and wouldn't just leave without telling his family. Much like other parents throughout this case, they hit a brick wall with police when they tried to get them to look into their missing son. On March 1st, Dean moved yet again to an apartment on South Post Oak Road before moving for a final time to 2020 Lamar Drive, an address his father had vacated in Pasadena. No known victims were killed between February 1st and June 4th, 1973, while he moved and scoped out his new area. It is very possible that he could have had a bit of a cooling off period during this time, but we think it is more likely that he had continued his tirade without the help of David or Wayne. Unfortunately, we may never know. Most of the information and timeline we have is because of the statements and testimony given by David and Wayne, and I will say mostly Wayne. Dean is known to have suffered from hydrocele in early 1973, so if he did have a cooling off period, it would have been due to this. Hydrocele is a condition when fluid collects in and around testicles and
Speaking
can
of
be
scrotums.
exactly, and it can be incredibly painful. In his case, good. Dean was also short one of his apprentices around this time. In January of this year, Wayne traveled to Florida with one of his uncles that worked as a long distance truck driver. He basically hitched a ride with him. Wayne temporarily relocated to Mount Pleasant, living with another uncle and cousin in an apparent effort to distance himself from Dean and his heinous lifestyle. Wayne would actually confide in both uncles about what was going on in hopes that they could lend some advice on how to get out. But it's not clear if either actually believed him or just thought he was on drugs. One of his uncles told his mother, Mary, that Wayne was, quote unquote, out of his mind. It was very clear that guilt was starting to eat away at Wayne, and he couldn't see a way out that didn't put him in danger. I mean, guilt was eating away at him for sure. But I feel like he only got into it for guilt in the first place,
Yeah.
because Dean was like, well, what about your friends?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. It's fear mongering for sure, but this is also really sad that he's confiding in adults,
Yes,
not
because
being
he is a
believed.
fucking child.
Like,
He is a fucking child.
yeah, at this point in
He's
our
like,
story, he's like
guys, what's
16 years old.
happening?
Yeah.
Yeah. In an effort to get Wayne to come back, Dean actually threatened one of his younger brothers.
What a piece
Wayne
of
felt
shit.
he had no choice. He was a family first kind of kid and couldn't live with himself if anything happened to his family. He told his brothers to never go near Dean without talking to him first or unless he was with them. He did not trust him one bit. From June 1973 on, the rate in which Dean killed increased dramatically, and both Wayne and David later testified to the increase in the level of brutality and the murders as well. When Dean would get in a bit of a frenzy, he would pace and smoke and go driving around. It was a sign he was agitated. It was like the rape, killing, and torture was a drug for him, and he was going through withdrawals.
Sounds like unhinged behavior.
Exactly. David and Wayne would know it was time to get another boy when he was like this. It's like how people, say that things escalate, and obviously we as true crime podcasters and like avid researchers see this escalation in everyone. But like this proves that, like, because some people are like, oh, he killed two people when he was like 17. Like, he's fine now. You don't fucking know. Okay. These things escalate. Okay.
Something could set them off. They could get like a
Yeah.
little twitch and need to kill somebody all of a sudden. Like, I don't know.
Right.
I can't relate personally. I drink coffee and wine in exchange for murder, but
I just yell really loud sometimes. And if my kids are around, I literally warn them. And I'm like, hey guys, just so you know, I'm not mad at you, but I really need to scream. And they're like, huh? And then I scream. And they're like, what? And I was like, I just need to let it out. It's out now. I'm
I
good.
love that. Do you need to be like Robbie? Do we need to get you a screaming pillow?
Ugh, maybe. And on June 4th, they did just that. 15-year-old William Billy Ray Lawrence was last seen leaving his home by his dad. He ran into Wayne on his walk and was coerced back to Dean's house to quote unquote party, i.e., smoke some weed and have some beers. After 3 days of abuse and torture, Billy was strangled before being buried at Lake Sam Rayburn.
3 days.
Prior to his death, he had called his dad and asked if he could go fishing with some friends for a few days and told him that he would be back. It's not clear if this was a forced call or if this is what Billy was told he would be doing before he disappeared for good. Billy's dad would receive a letter from his son saying that he had received a job on the fishing boat and would be gone until at least August. Since it was summer vacation, it was a plausible lie, but it was signed with the words, "No, I love you," which is just so sad.
Yeah.
Much like other victims of Dean Corll, this letter was absolutely forced. Super duper extra trigger warning because this is bound to get sad. When these boys were tortured, sometimes their pubic hair would be plucked out one by one. Sometimes there were large dildos used on them, and worst of all, they would have glass rods shoved up their penis and broken while inside.
I don't even have a penis and I'm
I don't
very
even
upset
like
about
to
that.
say these words. I don't like to read these words. I don't like that. Mm-mm.
That was the only time we mention it because we've just been saying tortured this whole time. But the
Yeah.
reality is, this is what they went through, and that's fucked.
On July 6th, 1973, Wayne began attending classes at the coach's driving school in Bel Air. He thought that if he could drive trucks, he could get the heck away from Dean. During his classes, he became friendly with 15-year-old Homer Luis Garcia. The following day, on July 7th, however, sorry, the following day, on July 7th, Homer told his mother that he wouldn't be home and would be spending the night with a friend from class. He was shot and left to bleed to death in Dean's bathtub before he was buried at Lake Sam Rayburn. Part of the tragedy in this is they were labeled as runaways. Sometimes they had already been estranged from their family and relationships. Sometimes they were seen as troubled kids. They were always reported missing late or not at all. Police were slow to open investigations into many of the missing boys as a result of all of this. As the years went on, Wayne and David were brainwashed by Dean, and the longer their crimes went on, Dean knew it was less likely they would report anything against him. They're so heavily implicated at this point, and it became a perfect storm to kill these poor boys and get away with it without being suspected because no one would be last seen with Dean. They were last seen with another teenager. On June 15th, 1973, Raymond Stanley Blackburn, a 20-year-old man from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, vanished while hitchhiking from his home to see his newborn child.
Oh.
He had only been in Houston for 3 weeks at this time, working on a construction project for extra money to support his new baby. He was strangled and buried at Lake Sam Rayburn. Raymond's wife reported him as missing when he didn't arrive, but she received a letter from him a few days later stating that he would need to be gone a little longer for work. Another excuse letter forced by Dean to buy him time and skew the timeline of the case. On July 12, 1973, 17-year-old John Manning Sellers was bound, shot 4 times, and buried at High Island Beach. He was the only victim to be buried fully clothed and not wrapped in plastic. When he was murdered, it was just 2 days before his 18th birthday. He was found farther out from other High Island Beach graves, and his grave was protruding from the ground. It is not clear if he was a victim of Dean Corll's or if the proximity and timeline is a coincidence and he was the victim of another crime. Neither David or Wayne remember for certain, but Wayne was quoted as saying Dean taught them how to bury people properly, so you couldn't tell. John was still tragically murdered and is associated with Dean despite the above differences, so we thought it was important to mention. I believe he was also having a bit of a fight. I was going to say a quarrel, but Dean Corll, that was bad. A bit of a fight with another person from near his home. And his
Yeah,
car was found like burned.
him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's possible.
I
remember
doesn't
that from the book
seem
too.
like one of his victims, but if honestly, it's ridiculously tragic either way. But I hope he wasn't one of Dean's victims because I don't want to think that he was tortured. I don't want to think that anyone else was tortured.
Yeah, I agree.
In July of 1973, David Brooks found out that his girlfriend at the time was pregnant. The two would be married on the 13th of that month. He moved out of Dean's and in with his new wife. For a period of time, Dean only had the help of Wayne while David focused on his new family. Dean couldn't let him be happy, though. He would dangle Wayne's work in front of him. Because David had been groomed and learned to rely on Dean, there was a strange tinge of jealousy. On July 19th, Michael Anthony Balch, 15, was abducted while on his way to get a haircut. If the last name sounds familiar, it's because Dean had killed his older brother, Billy, the previous year. Michael was strangled in Dean's home and buried at Lake Sam Rayburn. The Balch family reported him as missing when he didn't return by sundown, but after the disappearance of his brother, he ran away frequently and was struggling emotionally. Police didn't believe it was possible for both boys to have disappeared, and Michael was labeled as a runaway as well.
So
Can
scary. Like he
you fucking
literally
imagine?
killed two sets of siblings. One they
Can you
done at the same time, but this, like, no.
imagine losing both of your children to the same fucking monster?
No, like the statistics on that
Like
have
a
to be
fucking
like 1 in
yes.
80 billion cajillion.
That's
Like,
insane. Now, at 17 and 18 years old, Wayne and David were harder for Dean to control, more unpredictable. They had more independence from him, and he was starting to become paranoid that they were conspiring against him. He was right, though, in some ways. David and Wayne were trying to figure a way to get out of the situation they were in, and at the same time, avoid being taken into the Dallas sex ring that Dean had threatened them with. They also were afraid of the legal implications if they did turn him in. They were a part of this, whether they liked it or not. Dean tried to keep the two of them apart as much as possible, but at one point suggested a weekend trip with Wayne. He told Wayne to tell his mother that he would be gone for a few days and that the two were going to look for work. Wayne's mother, Mary, had absolutely none of that.
I loved this
She
part of the
didn't
book. I'm like,
she didn't like Dean to begin with and told him he wouldn't be taking her son anywhere.
love it.
In hindsight, Wayne believes that Dean wanted to take him out of town to kill him, and I would not doubt that.
Mm-hmm.
On July 25th, 17-year-old Charles Corll and 18-year-old Marty Ray Jones were abducted together. They both knew Wayne from school, neither came from a very good home, and both had a run in or two with the law. Charles last phoned his father in hysterics, claiming he and Marty had been kidnapped by drug dealers. Marty's wife was pregnant at the time, and he would never get to meet his child. After being tortured by Dean, Marty was shot in the head, and Charles was so distraught over watching his best friend be murdered in front of him that he suffered a heart attack. After coming to, he too was shot in the head, and both boys were buried in the boat shed Dean rented.
The stress that would have to be on a 17-year-old boy to have a heart attack. Like,
Wayne wrote a confession letter about everything he had done, hoping Dean would find it and kill him. He was extremely distraught over everything that had happened, and it was clear there was no way out for him. He even tried telling his mother, but she recommended he speak to a professional, believing it couldn't be that bad. She knew how much he was drinking and that he was using drugs and that something was very wrong, but she didn't know how to help him herself. All she could do was keep him safe and keep working to support her boys the best she could. We are not at all blaming Wayne's family, but it's just so sad that he tried to tell people over and over and over again, and he didn't get the help he needed. It's very clear that he didn't want to do this anymore, and that this is what I feel like when people are in a cult. Like when people want out and they just fucking can't. Like I don't know what to do. Even when they tell you what to do, like his mom's like, you should just see a therapist. And he's like,
yeah.
that's not it. That's not the right answer.
Yeah. I think to an extent too, as like a mom, you would never want to believe that that's like
Right.
something your kid was involved in too. And
Yeah.
it's a lot easier to blame it on drugs like his uncles
Right.
did, and saying he was out of his mind and like he needed help. Well, he does need help, but just not in the way people are giving it to him.
Right. Wayne calculated the cost to go to Australia and asked one of his friends to go with him. They could find work once they were down there. He was desperate to get away from Dean, thinking of anything he could during this period. I honestly wonder and feel like if his uncles or mom or anyone even listened, like believed him even a tiny bit, if someone suggested go to the police, I think he would have. I think he would have full on turned himself in if they would have agreed to protect him because he was also fucking terrified.
Well, of course, he's inching towards adulthood at this point and is being implicated in some adult crimes. So
Honestly, I don't even think that's what terrified him. I mean, maybe. I'm sure it wasn't fun. I
I
mean,
think he was
I'm
afraid to
sure it was
leave his
scary, but
mom and his brothers alone.
I think he was afraid that someone in the sex ring was in jail and would kill him there.
Oh, yeah.
I think he was scared,
True.
of being tortured by another one of Dean's people.
Yeah, Dean
if
totally
Dean's people
created
existed.
a boogeyman for these
Yeah,
boys. And
yeah,
he
he
was
really
the
did.
boogeyman. Like he like yes, places like that exist, like I mentioned in part 1 and you'll get there, but it's just oof,
Yeah.
yeah, I can't even imagine. My heart's very
Dean
sad.
was equally desperate to leave town. He saw how Wayne was unraveling emotionally and couldn't figure out a way to get rid of him. So maybe moving was the solution. At the time, Dean had been dating a man for the past 3 months, known in books and articles as Guy. Dean didn't want to leave his boyfriend, but Guy wasn't prepared to move, so Dean took his chances, staying where he was in Dallas, becoming increasingly paranoid of getting caught. On August 3rd, 1973, Dean would kill one last victim, a 13-year-old boy from South Houston named James Stanton Dramala. James was riding a bike in Pasadena when he was approached by Dean in the neighborhood. He had been riding around collecting empty bottles for extra money. Dean told him he had some at his house because he had been hosting a party, but instead of collecting bottles, the poor kid was tied to Dean's torture board, raped, and strangled with a cord before being buried in the boat shed. Neither Wayne or David had been a part of picking up James. Dean had done this one on his own. David was able to positively identify him as having been at Dean's, though, because he had brought them pizza and hung out for about 45 minutes before leaving, knowing the boy was doomed. It was heartbreaking that this became a part of normal life for David and Wayne. On the evening of August 7th, 1973, hey, anniversary? Wayne invited 20-year-old Timothy Cordell, sorry, 20-year-old Timothy Cordell Curley to attend a party at Dean's house. Timothy had known Dean as well and didn't even think twice about heading over to his house that night. It was clear that he was intended to be their next victim, as Dean asked Wayne on more than one occasion to get Tim, but things went very differently this time around. The boys drank and sniffed paint fumes together until about midnight before Wayne and Timothy left to go get some beer. When they returned to the neighborhood, they heard a commotion on the street. 15-year-old Rhonda Louise Williams was walking out of her house nursing a sprained ankle. She had been beaten by her drunken father that evening and had ran out of the house for help.
Oh my God.
When Wayne saw her, he invited her to join them for some drinks at Dean's house. It was about 3 a.m. when they arrived back at Dean's house again. Dean was furious at Wayne for bringing a girl to his house. He told him that he had ruined everything. When Wayne explained what had happened to Rhonda and why she had come over, he seemed to calm down a little bit. They all smoked weed, had some more drinks, and eventually passed out. Wayne would be suddenly woken. He was lying on his stomach, and Dean was putting handcuffs onto his wrists. He had tape over his mouth, and his feet were bound together. When he looked beside him, Rhonda was also bound and gagged on her stomach, as was Timothy beside her, but Timothy was also naked. Noticing he was awake, Dean removed the tape from Wayne's mouth, and he quickly protested and begged him to let them all go. Dean was still mad that Wayne had brought a girl back with him, and that he wasn't going to let them ruin his plans. He was going to assault and torture Timothy and then kill all of them. Per Wayne's later testimony, he was lifted to his feet and taken to the kitchen where Dean pointed a gun at his stomach, threatening to shoot. Wayne tried to persuade Dean to let him help with the torture and murders, and that he would do whatever he asked. Wayne knew Dean would do exactly what he was threatening to do if he didn't try to interject. Timothy was his friend, and he had brought Rhonda into the situation by trying to be kind to her. He couldn't let them die. After 30 minutes of persuading, Dean untied Wayne, and they brought Timothy and Rhonda into the bedroom and tied them to the torture board. Dean handed Wayne a hunting knife, instructing him to cut away Rhonda's clothes and that he was to rape and kill her, while Dean did the same to Timothy. Wayne asked Dean if he could bring Rhonda into the other room, but Dean was ignoring him, too focused on Timothy. Running out of time, Wayne grabbed the same pistol that had been pointed at him earlier and ordered Dean to stop, that he had gone too far and he couldn't do this to people anymore. Dean told him to go ahead and shoot, not believing that Wayne would do it, but he did, shooting him in the forehead. The bullet didn't penetrate his skull, though, and he lunged toward Wayne. Wayne shot him twice more, and Dean ran out of the room and into the wall in the hallway. Wayne fired 3 more shots, finally killing Dean. He landed naked against the hallway wall. Ironically, Dean had taught Wayne to shoot until a man was down, to act quickly and purposely, and this is exactly what he did. Wayne cried and untied Timothy and Rhonda from the torture board. All 3 of them needed a minute to recover. Wayne tried to get his friends to leave, then thought about running himself, but would eventually call the Pasadena Police Department at 8:24 a.m. and he explained what had happened and that he had shot Dean to save his friends' lives. They were taken to the police station for questioning, and Wayne was eager to get everything off his chest, finally. Timothy told the officers that Wayne had said to him, "If you wasn't my friend, I'd have got 200 for you." It's disgusting and scary. And also, kind of almost identical to what Jeffrey Epstein was giving people. Anyway.
Oh, that's a sad. Yeah, that's true. I don't think I mentioned it in here because this episode was already so long, but it sucks that like initially investigators were looking at them as like suspects and
Oh
not
yeah.
they weren't initially treated as somebody that like they were being held captive. But sure, let me question you for hours and make sure
Yeah.
that you're not responsible. I get it. There's a due diligence when there's a murder involved, but I
Yeah.
can't even imagine the added trauma that put on these kids. Like,
Yeah.
just, ugh.
Also, it was the 70s of it all, right? Like, people actually take victims a little more seriously now, but back then it was like, I don't know. That guy was the fucking candy man. Why would he do this?
Yeah.
Wayne went on to tell investigators that over the last 3 years, he and David Brooks had helped procure teenage boys for Dean and bring them back to his home where he would rape, torture, and murder them. Some of the victims were friends and acquaintances of one or both boys. Wayne told them initially he believed that they were being sold into an underground Dallas organization and that this is where the money was coming from, and later learned that all or many of Dean's victims had been killed. He told investigators how they were forced to help in the torture and killing at times, and that they would help Dean get rid of the bodies afterwards. Wayne admitted to actively participating in at least 7 or 8 of the murders, and that Dean Corll had paid up to $200 for each victim he and David Brooks were able to get. It all sounded so deranged that the police were skeptical in what the teen was telling them. But as Wayne listed the names he remembered, locations where the boys were buried, etc., the pieces started to fall into place. Most of the detailed information we have about the case today is because of the statements written by Wayne Henley. Officers were instructed to collect David Brooks for questioning, and Rhonda Williams and Timothy Corll were finally released to their parents. At Dean's home, the floor of the room where the 3 teenagers had been tied was covered in thick plastic sheeting. Police
Ugh.
also found a plywood torture board with handcuffs attached to nylon rope at 2 corners. Among the items found at Dean's address were a large hunting knife, rolls of clear plastic sheeting, an electric motor with loose wires attached, 8 pairs of handcuffs, a number of dildos, and all sorts of horrific sizes, thin glass tubes, and lengths of rope. Until we got to like the sex torture, it was like Dexter.
Yeah. It
But
was
then it
feeling
just
very Dexter.
became very deranged.
Yeah.
In his van, they found that the windows were sealed by blue curtains. There was rope, a wooden crate, several rings and hooks, and there was a pegboard on the wall of the van that had clearly been used to restrain his victims. They found blood, soil, and sand stains, as well as several strands of human hair. Wayne accompanied investigators to Dean's boat shed, where he announced they would find most of the victims buried inside. Inside the shed, they found a child's bike, a large iron drum, containers of water, pails of lime, and a large plastic bag with teenage boy clothing.
Oh, that's fucking so sad. I know at times he like made David and Wayne wear items of clothing of those boys too. I read that
Ugh.
somewhere, and that's fucked up. All of it is fucked up, but that's an added little cherry of scary.
The boys were at differing levels of decomposition. Some still had ligatures and gags on their bodies. There was evidence of sodomy and torture among all of these boys. So horrific, we don't even want to repeat more than we have already told you. The excavation would continue over the next several days. On the evening of August 8th, David Brooks gave his statement, in which he denied any knowledge of or participation in the murders, but then later admitted to having known that Dean had raped and killed two teenagers in 1970 and naming them as Reuben Haney and Mark Scott.
Sir,
On
you
the morning,
know way more than that.
yeah. On the morning of August 9th, Wayne Henley gave a full written statement detailing his and David's involvement with Dean in the abduction and murder of numerous youths. He said that David Brooks was lying and that there was only 3 murders that he took place in that David was not present for in some capacity. He signed his confession and was cooperative in helping the police locate as many of the victims as possible. Later that afternoon, Wayne accompanied police to Lake Sam Rayburn, where he told them they would find the 4 victims buried on that shore. He directed them to 2 additional bodies in shallow, lime-soaked graves located by the dirt road leading down to the beach. Given the confrontation of Wayne's signed confession, later that evening on the 9th, David Brooks would finally admit to being present at several of Dean's murders and assisting in several burials, although he continued to deny having participated in any of the actual murdering. David said that once the boys were on the torture board, they were as good as dead, and he learned to tune out the screaming and crying.
Oh my
So
God.
even if you didn't do it, you knew it was happening, mister.
And didn't do anything to stop it, which again,
Yeah.
added complication of them being afraid. Like they had talked about it before, but
Yeah. I think the
a
difference
weird
is
gray
Wayne
area.
clearly felt guilt, and David, even after being presented with it, did you do this? Was like, nah, that's weird to me. I don't like that about him.
I agree.
On August 10th, 1973, both Wayne and David accompanied police to High Island Beach, leading police to the shallow graves of 2 victims on the beach. On August 13th, they returned to the beach where 4 more bodies were found, making a total of 27 known victims, the worst killing spree in American history at the time. Keep in mind, this was before John Wayne Gacy and Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer and all of the other monsters that we've already covered and have learned about that were caught in the late 70s and early 80s. The Houston police received a lot of deserved criticism for labeling many of the boys as runaways and not launching an appropriate investigation into the reports they received. For example, Everett Waldrop, the father of Donald and Jerry Waldrop, complained that shortly after his sons had disappeared in 1971, he had informed police that an acquaintance had observed Dean Corll burying what appeared to be bodies at his boat shed. In response, police checked around the shed, but ultimately labeled the report a hoax and left the scene. Yeah, that's insane. Many parents had reported that Dean had hung out with their child at one point in the past, especially when the Corll Candy Company was open. He had been labeled on occasion as creepy for always being seen in the neighborhood with teenage boys. Ultimately, those claims were dismissed as well, and that there was nothing wrong with a local business owner providing a safe place to hang out when they weren't at school or at home.
Gray area.
It is definitely a gray area. However, I feel like that's exactly what churches do too.
I know.
But also, anyway. Dean used David and Wayne after this to bring boys to his house so future sightings and connections were not made, as we mentioned. All but one of the murdered boys were identified by 1985 with DNA technology, but it took a long time to match dental reports, missing person reports, and sort through all of the excavated bones they did have. The unidentified victim is known as the John Houston Doe. He was the 16th victim recovered from the boat shed and was in advanced stage of decomposition at the time of his discovery. This led investigators to believe this was one of the earlier murders committed by Dean Corll between 1971 and 1972. The body was buried wearing red, white, and blue striped swimming trunks, cowboy boots, a leather bracelet, and a long-sleeved khaki-colored t-shirt decorated with a peace symbol.
There's a whole vibe, and I'm here for it.
Yeah. In addition, his shirt had a handwritten inscription believed to read either LB4MF, LBHMF, L84MF, one of those. The boy had dark hair and may have had a spinal condition or injury affecting the way he walked, possibly causing pain. There are a few boys that disappeared within the area within that timeline, but investigators have very little DNA to test against and are hoping a family member will be able to positively identify before testing. An updated facial reconstruction was distributed in August of 2023, and that will be on our website. You can find the link in our show notes. Wayne Henley and David Brooks were tried separately for their roles in the murders. Wayne was charged with 6 murders on July 1st, 1974, and chose not to testify in court. He knew what he had done and had already said everything he needed to say during questioning and the investigation. The prosecution read several quotes from his written statement, and it is all available online, but again, too horrific to talk about in further detail than we have already done. Wayne was sentenced to 99 years and is eligible again for parole in October of 2025 when he will be 69 years old. He was 17 at the time of his arrest. David was charged with 4 murders and sentenced to life imprisonment on March 4th, 1975. David reportedly showed no remorse during his trial, and it took the jury only an hour and a half to find him guilty. He tried to appeal his sentence in May of 1979, but it was denied. On May 28th, 2020, David Brooks died at the age of 65 from COVID-related complications in prison. We also did a little bit of digging into his wife and daughter just out of curiosity, because remember that David had gotten a young girl pregnant and married her in 1973. Her name was Bridget Clark, and she did not stay married to David. Their divorce was finalized in March of 1977. Bridget went on to live a quiet life with her daughter, and they were incredibly close. Bridget died in 2012 at the age of 54 after battling an unlisted illness, and it's said her daughter Rachel died before her at the age of 18, and the cause of death was listed as unknown.
Which is so spooky.
We are glad they were able to live a life past this tragedy together, though.
Even if it wasn't long enough.
Yeah. Investigators believe that it is possible that Dean Corll was responsible for more than 28 murders. 40 boys vanished from the Heights area of Houston between 1970 and 1973. There were 2 extra bones found when searching Highland Island Beach that does not belong to any of the other bodies recovered. An arm bone and a pelvis, indicating at least one other body having been buried somewhere on the beach. But unfortunately, due to Hurricane Ike, that area of the beach now remains underwater. Additionally, former employees of the Corll Candy Company noted that they had seen Dean digging a lot in the years leading up to 1968. He told people that he was burying spoiled candy to avoid insects getting to it, which, like, if you throw it in the garbage and that's taken away, that wouldn't happen. But sure, yeah, bury it. David Brooks also reported that Dean had told him about his first murder victim, stating he had been picked up at 1353 Judy Way Street in October or November of 1968. But that had been before David came into the picture, so he couldn't corroborate it for sure.
Oh no.
The confessions of both David and Wayne described two murders having occurred on unknown dates between October 25th, 1971 and early March 1972 that neither knew of or were a part of, but they both separately remembered Dean mentioning it to them. The January 14th, 1973 disappearance of a 16-year-old Norman Lamar Prater has been tentatively, here we
There
go,
you go.
sorry,
Nailed it.
tentatively linked to Dean Corll. The teen was last seen by his mother in Dallas in the company of an adult male and two other teens with shoulder-length hair. He had previously lived in the same neighborhood as most of Dean's known victims and had attended the same high school as Wayne Henley between 1970 and 71. There is no physical evidence, but the timing, location, and testimony of his mother is far too coincidental to not be considered. During the search of Dean's home, an incredibly haunting Polaroid was found of an additional unidentified victim. The photo was taken between late 72 and 73. The image depicts a blonde-haired teenage youth in handcuffs, strapped to a device on the floor alongside a toolbox known to contain various instruments Dean used to torture victims. The boy appears to be crying and screaming in the photo. The individual depicted has been ruled out by the Harris County Medical Examiner as being any of the known victims, including the one that remains unidentified. Neither David or Wayne were able to identify the boy in the photo or even remember the photo having been taken, leading further proof that Dean Corll had acted alone at times. We'll also have the photo on our website in case anyone listening recognizes him, but it will come with a trigger warning because, obviously.
Yeah, it's pretty haunting.
As Alicia mentioned in part one, there was a mention of a sex ring being run underground in Dallas using children and teenage boys. While Dean had mentioned it several times as a threat that he was a part of an organization that bought and sold boys, there is evidence that he may have been telling a little bit of the truth. In February 1975, Houston police seized pornographic pictures and films of boys, some as young as 8 years old,
Oh my
and
God.
most of which were among the missing teens from the Heights area. Of the 16 identified boys in the pictures and films, 11 of them were identified as murder victims of Dean Corll, meaning he took photos and videos of his victims to be purchased as they were being tortured.
We did touch on that lightly with Karen Conti when we were talking about John Wayne Gacy, because his conspiracy is that he was involved in a similar
Right.
organization and like basically creating snuff films and photos. And like, oh my God, it's so heartbreaking.
Right. So maybe the actual children weren't being sold, but pictures and videos
the
of
content
them were.
of them before. Yeah.
Right.
If that wasn't clear.
The seized items were found in a warehouse belonging to a man named Roy Ames, a known producer of child pornography, whose name police had found on a card in Dean Corll's wallet. This lends further evidence in his involvement.
AKA an actual piece of shit.
Yeah, if the rest of it didn't make him one,
Yeah.
this does.
Yeah, right.
On August 15th, 1973, just 2 days after investigators had uncovered the final bodies linked to Dean Corll, investigators in Dallas uncovered a nationwide ring operated by a man named John David Norman. During the raid, a card filing system containing 10,000 plus names of people subscribed to this network was seized. While there is no physical evidence tying Dean and John Norman, the photos in the warehouse are thought to have been related to the same underground ring. So, at the very least, there is a secondhand connection to the two men. In any case, this story is incredibly tragic, but one I have always been interested in, especially when you take into account that Dean Corll completely brainwashed and used David and Wayne for so many years. So many lives were destroyed here, including theirs. We are also pleased to announce that we will be recording a special Part 3 Q&A with Tracy Ullman and Catherine Ramsland, authors of the book that we used as our main source in our research, The Serial Killer's Apprentice, the true story of how Houston's deadliest murderer turned a kid into a killing machine. So be sure to tune in next week for that. Before we go, what are our last thoughts? I have one. Do you have any before I spit this out?
Go off.
Do you think police didn't care because some of them were buying those photos?
Mm-hmm.
They knew that there was this child
That this was
torture
happening?
sex
I think
thing,
that's
and they
so
were
possible.
either in on it or fucking disgusting enough to purchase those photos.
Yeah. I mean, we've heard of like kids getting labeled as runaways,
Yeah.
but this organization being here on top of
Yeah.
all of
And
those connections, it just
right.
feels too coincidental.
Like, it's one thing that you're like, oh, that was a runaway. But when that many 40
40?
people in what,
Yeah.
3 years
Yeah. In
went
one
missing?
neighborhood?
Yeah, one neighborhood. They're not all fucking runaways, for one. For two, people have told you Dean Corll's name multiple times. And it's not like these are not that it should matter, but it's not like these were sex workers or drug addicts or, all of those things that police are usually like, oh, whatever. These are literal fucking children. So unless you have a reason for them not wanting to be found, I don't understand why you wouldn't follow a single one of those leads. You had so many that all pointed to the same fucking person.
I agree.
I did mention in part 1 that the reason this story is like the most fascinating to me is because of the roles of Wayne and David. And I said, we'll get to it. So I just wanted to elaborate a little bit. It's really hard in this case, in all cases that this happens, but this one particularly gets to me to decipher whether or not these two are perpetrators or victims.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, they were actively killing people, but at least in Wayne's case, he clearly had remorse, so much so that he killed Dean Corll.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't happen very often.
No.
If ever.
No.
Like, he didn't kill him and then
Keep
take
doing
over.
it. Yeah.
It's not like he would wanted to be better. He killed him and called the cops.
Yeah.
And told them everything.
He's like, this is done now.
Like, where do you draw the line? At what point are you a victim? And at what point are you a perpetrator? It's hard. It's so hard in this case to me. That's why this is so fascinating. I don't know.
And then the justice system side of it, does he deserve to have his entire life taken away because of this? I don't know either. I mean, the appeals processes are very much up to family members, and family members have every right to feel the way that they do about that situation. But us being a little bit more objective, it is hard. Like, he was 17. That's still a kid. Like,
I don't know how I would feel if one of my friends or family was one of those 28 boys.
yeah.
So
That's what I
don't know.
mean. Like, we are able to look at it more objectively. We could go on about it forever. So you guys will definitely have to tune in next week. And we really want to know what you think about this whole dilemma. If you want to write in with any questions that you guys might have, please feel free. And yeah, let us know your thoughts, because this one's definitely kept me up at night. And I've lived in it for the last month and a half. And I'm still not over it, because I still got to edit the other episodes. But, I'm glad that we covered it. I'm glad that we chose to do this one next. And I didn't know nearly as many details going into it. So,
yeah.
Woo, stress.
Anyway.
Yeah. Everyone involved in this whole scenario is just like, it was senselessly affected. So just tragic. And on that note, do you have anything happy?
Yeah.
Happy thoughts. What are you looking forward to?
I am going to see Hawthorne Heights in 2 days.
Yes, that's
I think I already
exciting.
used that one, but it's coming
you
up
mentioned
now,
it a few. So. Yeah, you mentioned it with Luke Holmes. So again, if you want to hear about that, you got to go join Patreon.
I did already see Luke Holmes. Yeah.
And that would have been an amazing concert. I already know, because I've seen him do.
Yeah.
My something exciting is the day that we are recording this. It is August 8th, and it is mine and Kevin's 11-year anniversary in 2 days. So we are going to go spend a night downtown in Washington. And I'm not saying where, just downtown Washington. You figure that out.
This comes out way later than your anniversary anyway.
And we are going to have Cheesecake Factory, of course, and visit a creepy historic park that I am making Kevin go to with me, because I want to see it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just very excited, even if it is just one night, to be able to focus on him in our relationship and just have like a little mini getaway. So that'll be fun.
It will be. We'll both be on mini getaways this weekend.
Yes. Excellent weekends ahead. Again, guys, if you like this episode, if you like us, if you like the show, go leave a 5-star rating and review. And please follow and/or subscribe wherever you are listening. It does make the difference in pushing us out to new audiences, and it really helps us out, and it makes it so you don't miss any episodes. Because who knows what happened to those poor Apple people that weren't following us? Maybe we don't exist anymore. They don't even know. But
they'll figure it out.
It really does help us out. And tune in next week for our very special interview with the authors of this crazy book, Catherine Ramsland and Tracy Ullman. And we will see you then. And in the meantime, keep it twisted. Twisted and Uncorked is a proud member of Weirding Way Media. Hosted and produced by Sierra Zorn and Alicia Watson. If you like the show, don't forget to leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you are listening now. It really is the best way to spread the word. You can check out all things Twisted on our website, twistedanduncorked.com, and we will see you next Tuesday for a brand new episode.